The train doors slid open with a mechanical hiss, and Maya Chen stepped onto the platform without a second thought. She had been dozing against the frosted window for the past 20 minutes, her phone clutched loosely in her hand, earbuds still playing the podcast she had stopped listening to an hour ago. The announcement overhead crackled something unintelligible, but Maya assumed it was her stop. Riverside Station. She had made this journey 100 times before. Except this wasn't Riverside Station. The realization hit her as the train pulled away, its red taillights disappearing into the swirling white chaos of the blizzard. Maya stood alone on the platform, watching her ride home vanish into the storm. The sign above her head read Millbrook Junction, in faded letters, half obscured by accumulated snow. She was 3 stops too early. Her breath formed clouds in the frigid air as panic began to set in. She reached for her phone. The screen showed 11:47 p.m. and a battery indicator at 4%. No signal. Of course there was no signal. She was in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by woods and darkness, with a storm that had transformed the world into a snow globe someone had shaken too hard. Maya pulled her coat tighter around herself and looked around the platform. It was small, just a raised concrete slab with a rusted metal awning that provided almost no protection from the driving snow. A single flickering light fought against the darkness, casting eerie shadows that danced with each gust of wind. There was a wooden bench, covered in a thick layer of white, and a small shelter that looked like it had been abandoned decades ago. She tried her phone again, hoping for even a single bar of service. Nothing. The screen dimmed as the battery drained before her eyes. Maya cursed herself for not charging it at the office. She cursed herself for falling asleep. She cursed herself for not paying attention to the announcements. The wind howled through the empty station, carrying with it a bone-chilling cold that seemed to penetrate every layer of clothing she wore. Maya's fingers were already going numb despite her gloves. Her thin office coat, perfectly adequate for a quick walk from the train to her apartment, was useless against this kind of weather. She made her way to the small shelter, her boots crunching through snow that was already ankle-deep and rising. Inside, the shelter was barely warmer than outside, but at least the walls blocked some of the wind. There was a schedule posted on the wall, but the paper was so old and faded that she could barely make out the times. She leaned closer, using her dying phone as a flashlight. The last train had left at 11:30 p.m. The next one wouldn't arrive until 6:15 a.m. 6 hours. She had to survive out here for 6 hours in a blizzard with no phone, no help, and temperatures that were dropping by the minute. Maya felt her throat tighten. She had told no one where she was going tonight. Her roommate thought she was staying late at work. Her mother lived 2 states away. Her ex-boyfriend, the only other person who might notice her absence, had blocked her number 3 months ago. She was completely, utterly alone. Maya sat down on the frozen bench inside the shelter and tried to think rationally. Someone would come. Someone had to come. Stations didn't just close and leave people stranded, did they? There had to be someone checking these places, especially during a storm. A maintenance worker. A security guard. Anyone. She waited, watching the snow pile higher outside the shelter entrance, and listened for any sound of human presence over the screaming wind. But as the minutes ticked by and her phone finally died, plunging her into near-total darkness, Maya began to understand a terrifying truth. No one was coming. Maya's watch read 12:23 a.m. when she decided she couldn't just sit and wait. The cold had already worked its way through her coat, her sweater, her shirt, settling into her bones like an unwelcome guest. Her teeth chattered uncontrollably, and she had lost feeling in her toes 10 minutes ago. If she stayed still for 6 hours, they would find her frozen solid in the morning, assuming anyone bothered to look. She needed to move. She needed to find warmth. Maya stepped out of the shelter and immediately regretted it. The wind slammed into her like a physical force, nearly knocking her backward. Snow stung her face, getting into her eyes and mouth. Visibility was down to maybe 10 feet in any direction. Everything beyond that was just white noise and darkness. She remembered seeing a building when the train pulled in, something that looked like it might be a station house or ticket office. Maya turned slowly, trying to orient herself, and spotted a dark shape through the blizzard. It was about 50 yards away, down the platform and across what she assumed was a parking lot. 50 yards. In good weather, that was nothing. In this storm, it might as well have been 50 miles. But she had no choice. Maya stepped off the platform and immediately sank into snow up to her knees. She pushed forward, each step requiring enormous effort. The wind pushed against her, trying to force her back. Snow found its way into her boots, melting against her skin. Her hands were so cold they barely functioned, but she kept them moving, kept pushing herself forward. The world had become a terrifying void of white and black, with no reference points, no sense of direction. Maya kept her eyes fixed on that dark shape ahead, praying it wouldn't disappear, praying she was actually walking toward it and not away from it. Her lungs burned from breathing in the frigid air. Her face felt like it was being scraped raw. After what felt like an eternity, her outstretched hands hit something solid. Wood. A door. Maya nearly cried with relief. She fumbled along the wall until she found the handle and pulled. It didn't move. She pulled harder, throwing her weight against it. Still nothing. Locked. The word echoed in her mind as despair threatened to overwhelm her. She pounded on the door with her fists, screaming for help, but the wind tore her voice away before it could travel more than a few feet. She tried the handle again, twisting and pulling and pushing, but it was solidly locked. Maya leaned against the door, her forehead pressed against the cold wood, and tried not to cry. Tears would just freeze on her face anyway. She had used up precious energy making this journey, and now she would have to make it back to the shelter with even less strength than before. Unless there was another way in. She forced herself to move along the side of the building, hands trailing against the wall, searching for a window or another door. The building was larger than she had thought, maybe 30 feet long. Her fingers found a window frame, and she used her elbow to try to break the glass. It didn't even crack. She tried again, harder this time, ignoring the pain shooting up her arm. Nothing. Then her hand found another door handle. Maya held her breath and turned it. This time, something gave. The handle moved. The door was unlocked. She nearly fell inside as the door swung open, stumbling into darkness that was somehow even more complete than the darkness outside. But it was warmer. Not warm, but warmer. Out of the wind. Out of the snow. Maya closed the door behind her and stood in the blackness, letting her eyes adjust. Gradually, shapes emerged. She was in some kind of office or waiting room. There were chairs along one wall, a desk, filing cabinets. Everything was covered in a thick layer of dust. It smelled like mold and old paper and abandonment. This place hadn't been used in years, maybe decades. But it had a roof. It had walls. It might save her life. Maya felt her way around the room, her hands exploring every surface. She found an old coffee maker with fossilized coffee still in the pot. She found papers yellowed with age, detailing train schedules from 15 years ago. She found a coat rack with a heavy wool coat hanging from it, moth-eaten but still intact. She grabbed the coat and wrapped it around herself, layering it over her own inadequate jacket. It smelled terrible, like mothballs and decay, but it was thick and heavy and blessedly warm. Maya pulled it tight and continued her exploration. Her hands found a closet door. Inside, stacked on metal shelves, were old blankets that the station must have once kept for emergencies. They were musty and probably full of dust mites, but they were another barrier against the cold. She pulled down 3 of them, wrapping herself in a cocoon. The room had no heat source that she could find, no radiator or space heater, but at least she was out of the wind. Her body slowly began to warm up, though her fingers and toes still felt like blocks of ice. Maya settled into one of the old chairs, pulled the blankets and coat tighter, and tried to calm her racing heart. She had found shelter. She had found warmth. She would survive the night. At least, that's what she told herself as the building creaked and groaned around her, and the blizzard screamed outside like something alive and hungry. Time moved differently in the darkness. Without her phone, without any light except the occasional flash of lightning that illuminated the snow-covered windows, Maya had no way to track the hours. She tried to stay awake, convinced that falling asleep in this cold might mean never waking up, but exhaustion pulled at her with relentless force. The building made sounds. Constant sounds. Wood creaking. Metal groaning. The wind whistling through unseen cracks. And sometimes, sounds that seemed to come from inside the building itself. Footsteps in distant rooms. Doors opening and closing. The whisper of voices that might have been just the storm or might have been something else entirely. Maya told herself it was just her imagination, just the old building settling, just the wind playing tricks. But alone in the dark, wrapped in blankets that smelled like the grave, those rational explanations felt thin and unconvincing. Around what she guessed was 2 in the morning, she heard it clearly. A door opening somewhere in the building. Not outside. Inside. The distinct sound of a door handle turning, hinges creaking, a door swinging open. Maya's entire body went rigid. She stopped breathing, listening with every fiber of her being. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps moving through the building. Coming closer. Her mind raced through possibilities. Maybe it was a security guard making rounds. Maybe it was a homeless person seeking shelter, just like her. Maybe it was help. She opened her mouth to call out, but something stopped her. Some primal instinct screamed at her to stay quiet, to stay hidden. The footsteps continued. They seemed to be in the hallway outside her room now, moving past her door. Then they stopped. Maya held her breath, her heart hammering so hard she was sure whoever was out there could hear it. She waited for the door to open, for someone to come in, for something to happen. But the footsteps just stood there, on the other side of the door, not moving. Minutes passed. The footsteps didn't move. Neither did Maya. Then, slowly, they started again, moving away down the hall. Maya heard another door open and close. Then silence. She sat frozen in her cocoon of blankets for another hour, too terrified to move, too terrified to make a sound. When nothing else happened, she tried to convince herself it had been her imagination. Sleep deprivation. Hypothermia affecting her brain. The storm creating acoustic illusions. But she knew what she had heard. As the night wore on, Maya drifted in and out of consciousness despite her best efforts to stay awake. In her half-dreams, she saw the station as it must have been decades ago. People waiting on the platform, consulting newspapers, chatting with neighbors. The ticket office busy with activity. Trains arriving and departing on schedule. Life and warmth and purpose. She dreamed of a woman in a blue dress, standing on the platform in the snow, waiting for a train that never came. The woman looked cold. She looked sad. She looked directly at Maya through the window and mouthed words Maya couldn't hear. Maya jerked awake, her heart racing. The room was still dark, still silent except for the storm. But something felt different. Wrong. She had the distinct sensation that she was not alone in the room. She stared into the darkness, trying to make out shapes, trying to see if someone was there. For a moment, she thought she saw a figure standing in the corner. A woman in dark clothing. But when she blinked, there was nothing there. Just her mind playing tricks. Just the fear and the cold and the exhaustion conspiring against her sanity. Maya forced herself to take slow, deep breaths. She recited her phone number, her address, her mother's birthday. Anything to prove to herself that her mind was still working, that she was still rational, that she wasn't losing her grip on reality. The storm showed no signs of letting up. If anything, it seemed to be getting worse. The wind howled with renewed fury, shaking the windows in their frames. Snow had piled up against the glass, blocking what little view there had been. Maya was entombed in this forgotten place, buried alive in a building that time had abandoned. She thought about the people who must have worked here once. The ticket agents and janitors and station masters. Where were they now? Had they retired to sunny places? Had they moved on to better jobs? Or had some of them died, their spirits still lingering in this place they had spent so many years? Stop it, she told herself. Stop thinking like that. But the thoughts wouldn't stop. In the dark, wrapped in blankets that belonged to ghosts, Maya couldn't help but wonder if she would become one of them. If she would freeze in this chair and spend eternity waiting for a train that would never come. If someone would find her in the spring, just bones wrapped in moth-eaten wool, another sad story for people to share over coffee. She shook her head violently, trying to dispel the morbid thoughts. She was going to survive this. She was going to make it to morning. She was going to see the sun again. She had to. The alternative was unthinkable. Dawn should have come by now, but the darkness persisted. Maya's watch had stopped working hours ago, the cold apparently too much for its mechanism, but she felt certain that it had to be past 6 in the morning. The train should be arriving. She should be hearing its whistle, seeing its lights through the snow-covered windows. But there was nothing. Just the endless storm and the suffocating darkness. Maya's body had moved past cold into something worse. She couldn't feel her feet at all anymore. Her hands were clumsy and useless, barely able to grip the blankets wrapped around her. When she tried to stand, her legs buckled, and she collapsed back into the chair. The room spun around her, and she realized with growing horror that she was experiencing the symptoms of severe hypothermia. Confusion. Dizziness. Extreme fatigue. The dangerous desire to just close her eyes and sleep. She had to move. She had to generate heat. If she gave in to the drowsiness now, she would never wake up. Maya forced herself out of the chair, nearly falling as her numb feet failed to support her weight. She caught herself on the desk and stood there, swaying, trying to remember why movement was important. Her thoughts were becoming sluggish, sticky, hard to hold on to. She began to pace the room, dragging the blankets with her like a cape. 1 step. 2 steps. 3 steps. Turn around. Repeat. Her body moved on autopilot while her mind drifted somewhere else, somewhere warm and far away. She was 7 years old, building a snowman in her backyard with her father. He was laughing, his breath making clouds in the air, telling her the secret to making the perfect carrot nose. The memory felt more real than the room around her. She was 16, kissing Tommy Mitchell behind the school during a snowstorm, both of them shivering and giggling, their lips cold but their faces flushed with excitement and teenage rebellion. She was 22, graduating from college, walking across the stage while her mother cried in the audience and snow fell gently outside the windows of the auditorium. The memories flickered through her mind like a movie on fast forward, disconnected from time and sequence. Maya couldn't tell anymore if she was walking in the abandoned station or walking through her own past. The boundaries had become blurred, reality and memory mixing together in a confused soup. She bumped into something hard and cold. A wall. When had she reached the wall? She turned around, but the room looked different now. Bigger. Brighter. There were people here, she realized. Lots of people. They were waiting for trains, reading newspapers from decades past, dressed in clothes from another era. A man in a gray suit tipped his hat to her as she stumbled past. A woman with victory rolls in her hair smiled and offered her a thermos of coffee. Maya reached for it, but her hands passed through the thermos like it was made of smoke. Not real. None of this was real. Maya blinked hard, trying to clear her vision, trying to pull herself back to reality. The people faded like morning mist, leaving her alone again in the dark, cold room. She was hallucinating. Her brain, starved of oxygen and warmth, was creating these visions. She needed to get out. She needed to get to the platform. The train had to be coming. It had to be. Maya stumbled toward where she remembered the door being, her hands outstretched, searching. She found the handle and pulled. The door swung open, and she was hit by a blast of frigid air and snow. The storm was still raging, possibly worse than before. She couldn't see the platform. She couldn't see anything beyond a wall of white. But the train had to be there. She just had to reach it. Maya stepped out into the blizzard, leaving the shelter of the building behind. The snow was waist-deep now, and she had to push through it like she was swimming. The wind tried to knock her down, tried to push her back, but she fought against it with what little strength she had left. Her foot hit something solid. The platform. She had reached the platform. Maya pulled herself up onto it, crawling now because she no longer had the strength to stand. Her blankets had fallen away somewhere in the snow, her coat was soaked through, but none of that mattered because the train was coming. She could hear it. The distant rumble of wheels on tracks, the blast of its whistle. She raised her head, squinting through the snow, searching for the train's lights. There. In the distance. 2 bright lights cutting through the storm, growing larger, growing brighter. The train was coming. Finally. Help was coming. Maya tried to wave, tried to signal, but her arms wouldn't move anymore. She tried to shout, but her voice came out as barely a whisper. She could only lie there on the platform, watching the lights grow closer, hoping the conductor would see her. The lights were almost upon her now, so bright they hurt her eyes. So close she could feel the vibration of the approaching train. So loud it drowned out even the howling wind. Maya smiled. She was saved. The lights passed over her, the rumble faded into the distance, and she realized, in a moment of perfect clarity before the darkness took her, that there had been no train at all. Just another hallucination. Just her dying brain showing her what she desperately wanted to see. The snow had stopped falling by the time Henry Morrison arrived at Millbrook Junction for his monthly inspection. The old station was on the decommissioning list, scheduled to be torn down in the spring, but until then, someone had to check that it wasn't becoming a hazard. Usually, these inspections were quick and boring. The place had been abandoned for 3 years, ever since the county cut funding for the rural train lines. But today felt different. Henry noticed the tracks in the snow first. Footprints leading from the platform to the old station house, almost completely filled in but still visible. Fresh tracks, made sometime during last night's storm. Kids probably, he thought, looking for a place to party or cause trouble. He'd have to file a report about the security breach. He followed the tracks to the station house and found the side door unlocked. Frowning, he pushed it open and stepped inside. The place was exactly as abandoned as it should be, covered in dust and decay, except for a set of wet footprints on the floor leading to one of the old waiting rooms. Henry's hand moved to the radio on his belt as he followed the footprints. Something about this didn't feel right. The air in the building was too cold, almost supernaturally cold, and there was a smell he couldn't quite identify. Not decay exactly, but something similar. Something wrong. The waiting room door was ajar. Henry pushed it open slowly, his heart beginning to race for reasons he couldn't explain. That's when he saw her. A young woman was slumped in one of the old chairs, wrapped in what looked like ancient wool blankets and a moth-eaten coat that Henry recognized as having belonged to the station master back when this place was operational. Her skin was pale, almost blue, and for a horrible moment, Henry was certain she was dead. Then she moaned softly. Henry's training kicked in immediately. He rushed to her side, calling for emergency services on his radio, checking for a pulse. It was there, faint and slow, but there. She was alive, barely, suffering from severe hypothermia if he had to guess. I've got a female, mid-20s, severe hypothermia at the old Millbrook Junction station, he barked into the radio. I need an ambulance here now. Copy that? Now. The woman's eyes fluttered open, unfocused and confused. She tried to say something, but her lips were too cold to form words properly. Henry wrapped his own coat around her, adding it to her layers, rubbing her arms to try to generate warmth. You're going to be okay, he told her, though he wasn't entirely sure that was true. Help is coming. Just stay with me. Stay awake. Her eyes seemed to focus on him for a moment, and he saw recognition dawn in them. Recognition that she wasn't alone anymore. That someone had finally come. A single tear rolled down her frozen cheek. Train, she whispered, so quietly he almost didn't hear it. Missed the train. The trains haven't run here in 3 years, Henry said gently, continuing to rub warmth into her arms. But that doesn't matter now. You're going to be fine. What's your name? Can you tell me your name? Maya, she breathed. Maya Chen. In the distance, Henry heard the wail of sirens. The ambulance was coming. He kept talking to her, keeping her conscious, keeping her focused on his voice and his face and the fact that she was no longer alone. The paramedics arrived 10 minutes later, moving with practiced efficiency. They loaded Maya onto a stretcher, wrapped her in thermal blankets, started and fought to warm her from the inside. Henry watched them work, still trying to process what had happened. This woman had been here all night. All through that terrible storm. In this freezing, abandoned building. And somehow, against all odds, she had survived. Before they loaded her into the ambulance, Maya's hand reached out and grabbed Henry's sleeve. Her grip was weak, but insistent. He leaned down so she could speak. Thank you, she whispered. I knew someone would come. I knew I just had to wait. Henry felt his throat tighten. You're very lucky, he said. A few more hours and we might have been too late. Maya shook her head slightly, her eyes drifting closed as the warmth of the ambulance and the medication began to take effect. Not luck, she murmured. Wasn't alone. She kept me awake. Kept telling me to hold on. Who? Henry asked. Who kept you awake? But Maya had already slipped into unconsciousness, her body finally able to rest now that she was safe. The paramedics closed the ambulance doors and drove away, sirens fading into the winter morning. Henry stood alone at the abandoned station, looking at the old building with new eyes. He thought about what Maya had said. About not being alone. He shook his head, dismissing the thought. Hypothermia caused hallucinations. Everyone knew that. There was nothing supernatural about what had happened here. Just a woman who got off at the wrong station and managed to survive through luck and determination. Still, as he walked back to his truck, Henry couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching him from the windows of the old station house. When he glanced back, he could have sworn he saw a figure standing in one of the windows. A woman in dark clothing, her face pale and sad. But when he blinked, there was nothing there. Just an empty window in an abandoned building. Henry got in his truck and drove away, telling himself it was just his imagination. Just the power of suggestion after Maya's strange comment. Just the eerie atmosphere of the old, forgotten place. But he made a mental note to recommend that the station be demolished as soon as possible. Some places, he decided, were meant to be left in the past. Some places held onto their ghosts too tightly to ever truly be abandoned. At the hospital, Maya Chen woke up 3 hours later, warm and safe, surrounded by beeping monitors and concerned medical staff. Her fingers and toes would heal. Her hypothermia would fade. The physical scars of her ordeal would eventually disappear. But she would never forget that night. Would never forget the terror of being alone in the dark. Would never forget the hallucinations that had seemed so real. And she would never forget the woman in the blue dress who had appeared in her dreams, urging her to stay awake, to keep fighting, to hold on just a little longer. The woman who might have been a hallucination. Or might have been something else. Maya would never know for sure, and she decided that was probably for the best. Some mysteries were meant to remain unsolved. Some questions were better left unasked. All that mattered was that she had survived. She had made it through the long, terrible night. And she would never, ever fall asleep on a train again.